Nora felt the sting of the champagne before she felt the wetness. Her mother-in-law Matilda had accidentally tossed the entire glass on her, the bubbles soaking her cheap dress. "Worthless," Matilda hissed loud enough for the garden party guests to hear. "You can't even stand still without ruining everything." Nora's husband, Liam, looked at his shoes. She was the family's punching bag, their Cinderella, without a fairy godmother. But they were all about to make a terrible mistake. They thought Nora was nobody. They didn't know about her grandfather. And they definitely didn't know about the army he commanded. Life for Nora Ashford was a masterclass in invisibility. She lived in the sprawling 5-bedroom executive home of her in-laws, Gregory and Matilda Ashford, yet she occupied less space than the potted ficus in the hallway. Her days were a quiet loop of chores performed on eggshells. She woke before the family made coffee. She wasn't allowed to drink. Matilda preferred her expensive pod-based machine and prepared breakfast only to eat a piece of dry toast in the laundry room while the family Matilda Gregory and their spoiled daughter Chloe discussed their day at the dining table. Nora had met Liam Ashford in college. He was then a man separate from his family kind, a little shy with a warmth that seemed to fill all the cracks in her own quiet life. She was an orphan or so, she'd told him. It was the simplest explanation. They fell in love with the gentle, inevitable pull of a tide. He was her anchor. Then they married. The wedding was small. Nora had no one to invite, and the Ashfords were already signaling their disapproval. "A library assistant," Matilda had scoffed, her voice like grinding glass. "Liam, you could have had a doctor, a lawyer, a Rothschild, and you bring us this." From the day she moved into the Ashford home, the anchor Liam was supposed to be became a chain. The family was new money, having clawed their way to suburban affluence through Gregory's moderately successful import-export business. They were desperate to be seen as old money, and Nora, with her worn cardigans, her quiet demeanor, and her complete lack of a dowry or connections, was a stain on their perfect beige-carpeted image. Nora the Silver needs polishing, Matilda would call just as Nora was settling down to read. And use the good polish, not that cheap stuff you like. "Nora, my golf clubs are still in the trunk," Gregory would grunt, tossing his car keys onto the table, never making eye contact. "See to it." "Nora," Chloe would whine, "this report for my marketing class is so boring. Can't you just write it for me? It's not like you do anything important." Her worst tormentor, however, was Matilda. She was a woman who weaponized passive aggression. She would accidentally donate Nora's clothes to charity. She would forget to set a place for her at dinner when guests were over. "Oh, Nora, are you still here?" she'd say with a theatrical gasp. "I'm so sorry, darling, we're just so cramped. Would you mind eating in the kitchen? Mrs. Henderson is telling us all about her trip to Aspen." And Liam, the man she loved. He was a ghost in his own home. He loved Nora. She knew it. In the rare moments they were alone, hidden in their bedroom, he was the same man she'd married. "I'm sorry, Ellie," he'd whisper, kissing her hair. "They're just stressed. Dad's business isn't great. They'll warm up. I promise." But the promises were as empty as the praise she never received. When his family was present, Liam would shrink. He'd find an urgent email to answer. He'd stare at his phone. He'd nod silently when Matilda said, "Liam, darling, Nora's presence is really bringing down the mood. Can't you talk to her?" Talk to her, as if she were a misbehaving dog. The present day was Chloe's 25th birthday party, a lavish garden affair designed to showcase the Ashfords' status. Nora had been tasked with helping the hired catering staff. "It's the least you can do, seeing as you didn't contribute to the gift," Matilda had said that morning, pointedly looking at the small, hand-bound book of poetry Nora had bought for Chloe. Matilda had picked it up with 2 fingers and dropped it in the recycling bin. "We don't need more clutter." So here Nora was in a simple navy blue dress, the only one she owned that wasn't stained or frayed, carrying a tray of champagne flutes. "You see that dress?" one of Chloe's friends whispered not quietly enough. "It's from a department store, a discount one." Chloe laughed a high-pitched, cruel sound. "She is the discount one. My brother's bargain bin wife." Nora kept her head down, her cheeks burning. She just had to get through the day. She navigated the flagstone patio, her hands steady, when Chloe's fiancé, a smug young man named Chad, stepped backwards without looking. He collided with Nora, the tray tilted. A dozen champagne flutes, from real crystal rented for the occasion, smashed onto the stone, spraying expensive champagne and glass shards over Matilda's pristine white roses. The party went silent. Nora's blood ran cold. I'm so sorry, You." Matilda's voice was a low, dangerous viper's hiss. She stormed across the lawn, her face a mask of purple rage. "You clumsy, worthless little fool." She didn't stop. She swung her arm back and slapped Nora across the face. The sound was as sharp and clean as the breaking glass. Nora's head snapped to the side, her hand flying to her stinging cheek. Gasps rippled through the crowd. "Look at this!" Matilda shrieked, pointing at the mess. "Look what you've done, hundreds of dollars in crystal ruined. You can't do one single thing right, can you? You are a walking disaster, a leech. My son has to pay to be married to you." Nora looked at Liam, her eyes pleading. He stood frozen by the barbecue, a spatula in his hand, his face pale. He looked at his mother. He looked at Nora. He looked at the ground. He said nothing. That single resounding silence was louder than the slap. It was the sound of Nora's last thread of hope snapping. "Clean it up!" Gregory boomed, his face red with embarrassment. "Now, get a dustpan and stay in the kitchen for the rest of the night. You've embarrassed us enough." Nora, her vision swimming with tears she refused to let fall, knelt on the stone and began picking up the shards of broken glass with her bare hands as the party slowly, awkwardly resumed around her. Nora wasn't an orphan. She was a Vance. The name Vance didn't mean much to most people. It wasn't plastered on skyscrapers or splashed across tabloids. The Vances didn't do new money. They were the kind of old money that owned the companies that built the skyscrapers. They were the silent bedrock wealth that wars, recessions, and scandals couldn't touch. They were the money that funded governments, that owned islands, that treated billionaire as a slightly vulgar term for people who still had to count. Her grandfather, Cornelius Vance, was the patriarch. He was a man who could and had made stock markets pivot with a single quiet phone call. He was also the man who had raised Nora after her parents, his only son, and his beloved daughter-in-law died in a tragic sailing accident when she was 6. Growing up as Nora Vance was a life of profound privilege and profound isolation. She was educated by private tutors, flew on private jets, and had a security detail before she could ride a bike. But the wealth was, as her grandfather always said, a poisoned chalice. "It's a wall, Nora," he'd told her one evening in the vast mahogany-paneled library of their New York estate. She was 20, home from her first year at Yale. It surrounds you, it protects you, but it also prevents you from ever knowing if someone sees you or if they just see the vault. He had seen it his whole life. Sycophants, takers, men and women who would prostrate themselves for a taste of the Vance power. He'd seen his own son marry a woman who, while lovely, was more in love with the idea of being a Vance than the man himself. So he proposed an idea, a test, an agreement. "Go," he said, his voice gentle but firm as granite. "When you graduate, take a new name, my mother's maiden name, Hart, Nora Hart. Take a stipend enough to live simply, not enough to draw attention. For 5 years, live a normal life, get a normal job. Find people who love Nora Hart. Find a man who loves you for your mind and your heart, not for the balance sheet you represent. And if I'm in trouble," she'd asked, her voice small, "you will never be in real trouble." He'd smiled, a rare, warm expression. He tapped a heavy, black, old-fashioned telephone on his desk. This was his red line, a secure satellite phone that didn't go through any switchboard. "You will have this number. You will memorize it. You will only use it in the most dire of circumstances, and you will use the code phrase we practiced." The code phrase was from a game they played when she was a child. "The Iron Eagle is nesting." "If I hear those words," he'd said, his eyes turning serious, "I will know the test is over, and I will come, and I will bring the full resources of this family to bear on whatever or whoever has threatened you." Nora had agreed, eagerly. She was tired of the bodyguards, of the whispers, of the way boys her age either fawned over her or were too terrified to speak to her. And so Nora Vance died, and Nora Hart was born. She got a degree in library science. She moved to a mid-sized suburban town. She got a job at the local library. And she met Liam Ashford. Liam had loved Nora Hart. He loved her for her quiet jokes, her love of dusty old books, and the way she'd listened to his own dreams of being an architect, dreams his father had crushed in favor of the family business. When they decided to get married, Nora had a choice: reveal the truth or continue the test. She looked at Liam, at his simple, honest love, and she chose to continue. She didn't want to poison this one real thing. She'd tell him on their 5th anniversary, when the agreement with her grandfather was over. She was 3 years into the marriage. 2 years to go. She had, in her darkest moments, been tempted. When Matilda locked her out of the house for an hour in the rain for forgetting to buy the right brand of milk. When Gregory lost the paycheck from her part-time library job, claiming it must have gotten mixed in with the junk mail. When Chloe borrowed and lost the one piece of jewelry Nora kept from her mother, a simple locket. Each time she'd held on. She loved Liam. He was just weak. His family was a vortex, and he was caught in the spin. He would get better. He would find his spine. She just had to be patient. That night, after the garden party humiliation, she sat on the small cot-sized bed in their guest room turned storage closet that the Ashfords had given her. Her cheek throbbed. Her hands were crisscrossed with small red cuts from the broken glass. Liam entered, closing the door softly. He sat on the edge of the bed, not touching her. "Ellie," he whispered. She said nothing. She just stared at her cut-up hands. "My mother. She has a temper. You know how she is." She was embarrassed. "She slapped me," Nora said, her voice flat, devoid of emotion. "She slapped me in front of 50 people. I know, and you did break a lot of crystal. It was a big reaction, but..." Nora turned to him. The look in her eyes finally made him stop. The warmth was gone. In its place was something cold and brittle. "You did nothing," she said. "What was I supposed to do? Nora. Start a fistfight with my own mother. You were supposed to say something. You were supposed to tell me to go inside. You were supposed to hand me a bandage. You were supposed to look at me like I was your wife, not your servant. It's complicated, Ellie," he said, running his hands through his hair. "My dad's business. It's really struggling. We're trying to land this big contract with a new supplier, and that's tied to Chad's father, and we need to keep up appearances. We can't have drama. We can't have drama." Her public humiliation, her pain was drama. "Get out," she whispered. "What? Get out. I want to sleep." Liam, looking relieved to be escaping a confrontation, nodded. "Okay. Yeah, we'll talk in the morning. Things will be better in the morning." He left. Nora locked the door. She sat in the dark for a long time. She looked at her hands. The test wasn't about finding someone who loved her. The test was about surviving the world without the armor of her name. And she was failing. The morning did not bring clarity. It brought a new, more sinister kind of storm. Nora woke up to the sound of her door being unlocked. Matilda Ashford stood in the doorway, her arms crossed, a look of triumphant disgust on her face. Chloe was behind her, filming with her phone. "Get up," Matilda commanded. Nora, her heart pounding, pulled the thin blanket around herself. What's wrong? What's wrong?" Matilda laughed, a dry, ugly sound. "I'll tell you what's wrong. You thieving, worthless little rat. I knew it. I knew from the day my son brought you home that you were trash." I don't know what you're talking about." "Oh, you don't?" Matilda strode into the room, Chloe trailing her like a vulture. "Then what I wonder is this." She ripped open the top drawer of Nora's small dresser, the one containing her underwear and socks. Matilda plunged her hand in, rummaged for a moment, and then pulled her hand out. Clutched in her fingers was a heavy antique gold locket studded with small, dull diamonds. "My grandmother's locket?" Matilda breathed, her voice filled with fake theatrical pain. "The one thing I cherished most in this world. The locket that went missing from my jewelry box this morning." Nora's blood turned to ice. She stared at the locket. She had never seen it before in her life. I didn't." "You didn't what?" Matilda screamed. "You didn't steal it. Then how did it get in your drawer, you filthy liar? You were probably going to sell it. After you broke all my crystal, you decided to just steal from me." "I would never," Nora cried, scrambling out of bed. "Matilda, I swear to you I have no idea how that got there." "Of course you don't." Chloe sneered, her phone's camera light a red, demonic eye. "Things just magically appear in your drawers. Maybe it was the library fairy." "This is it, Nora," Matilda said, her voice dropping to a cold, calm level that was far more terrifying than her yelling. "I have put up with you. I have tolerated your presence in my home, your leeching off my son, your constant embarrassment. But this is a crime. You have committed a crime." "What are you going to do?" Nora whispered, backing against the wall. "What am I going to do?" Matilda smiled, a thin, cruel slash. "I'm going to do what I should have done 3 years ago. I'm calling the police." "No. Please, Matilda, don't. I didn't do it." Nora looked past her desperation in her eyes. Liam and Gregory were standing in the hallway, drawn by the noise. "Liam," she cried. Liam, please, tell them I wouldn't do this. Liam looked at the locket in his mother's hand. He looked at his wife, cornered and terrified. He looked at his father, whose face was a stony mask of agreement. Mum, Liam started, his voice weak. Maybe it was a mistake. A mistake, Gregory snapped, stepping forward. She was caught red-handed, Liam. Are you blind or just stupid? This girl is a common thief. What else has she taken? How much of our money has she siphoned away? No, Nora sobbed. I've never taken a penny from you. Silence, Matilda yelled. I've already made the call. They're on their way. Pack your things, Nora. You are no longer welcome in this house. You're kicking me out. I'm having you arrested, Matilda corrected. And when you get out of jail, you are not coming back here. Gregory, get her a trash bag. That's all she deserves. Liam just stood there, his mouth opening and closing silently. He wouldn't meet her eyes. The next hour was a blur of absolute dehumanizing horror. Two police officers looking bored and slightly annoyed at being called to a domestic dispute arrived. Matilda put on a tearful, distraught victim performance that would have won an Oscar. She showed them the locket, showed them where she found it. Ma'am, do you want to press charges? One officer asked. Absolutely, Matilda said, dabbing a dry eye. I want her charged to the fullest extent of the law. I want to send a message. We do not tolerate this. The officers, with a sigh, turned to Nora. Ma'am, you'll need to come with us. They didn't handcuff her, but the implication was the same. They led her in her pajamas and the same worn cardigan she'd fallen asleep in out of the house. Past Chloe, who was still filming. Past Gregory, who looked satisfied. And past Liam. She stopped in front of him. The officers paused, giving her a moment. Liam, she said, her voice hoarse. One word. Just say you believe me. Just one word, and I can fight through this. Liam looked at her, his face an agonizing portrait of weakness. He was terrified of his mother, of his father, of the scene of the police. He was terrified of everything. He couldn't say it. He just shook his head, a tiny, almost imperceptible movement, and looked away. That was the moment Nora's heart, which had been cracked and bruised for 3 years, finally shattered. It wasn't the slap. It wasn't the accusation. It was this. The final deafening silence from the man who had promised to love and protect her. Let's go, Nora said to the officers, her voice now empty. She was taken to the local police station. She was fingerprinted. They took her picture. She was put in a small, cold holding cell that smelled of bleach and despair. She was a common thief, a nobody, worthless. She sat on the metal bench, the cold seeping into her bones, and for the first time in her 27 years, Nora Vance truly, completely gave up. She was in the holding cell for 6 hours. The officers, after questioning her, seemed to realize the situation for what it was. A flimsy, he said, she said, domestic mess. There was no proof Nora had taken the locket, only that it was found in her room. Nora, in a quiet, monotone voice, explained her side. She explained the abuse, the cruelty, the systematic humiliation. Look, lady, the older officer, a man named Sergeant Riley, said, rubbing his eyes. I believe you. I've seen families like this my whole career. The mother-in-law's story has more holes than a spaghetti strainer. But she is the one pressing charges, and the locket was in your room. My hands are tied. So, what happens? Nora asked, her voice cracking. We can't hold you. There's not enough. We're releasing you on your own recognizance. But you've got a court date for an arraignment. And Mrs. Ashford. She filed a temporary restraining order. You can't go within 500 feet of the house. He pushed a small bag of her belongings, her shoes, her cardigan, her keys, which were now useless, through the slot. You're free to go. Free. She was free to be homeless, jobless, and facing a criminal charge. She walked out of the police station into the late afternoon gloom. It had started to drizzle a cold, miserable rain that matched her soul. She had no coat. She had her library ID and she checked her cardigan pocket. A single crumpled $20 bill. She had no one. Her friends from the library. They were acquaintances, not call at 3 a.m. from jail friends. And Liam. She looked at her cheap pay-as-you-go phone. No missed calls, no texts. He hadn't even checked to see if she was okay. She walked. She didn't know where she was going. She just walked until her shoes were soaked and her hair was plastered to her stinging cheek. She ended up at a 24-hour diner, the open sign, a lonely neon beacon. She slid into a cracked vinyl booth, the $20 bill crumpled in her hand. A waitress, seeing her state, took pity and brought her a cup of black coffee without asking. "Tough night, honey," the waitress said, not unkindly. Nora just nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. She sat there for an hour, nursing the single cup of coffee the diner's patrons, a blur of muffled conversations and clattering plates. She was at the bottom. This was it. There was no further down to fall. She had endured the insults. She had endured the servitude. She had even somehow endured the slap. But the accusation of theft, the cold metal of the holding cell, and the absolute gut-wrenching betrayal of her husband. That was the end. The test was over. Her promise to her grandfather was to find true love. But the agreement also had a fail-safe. In the most dire of circumstances, what she thought a bitter, hysterical laugh bubbling in her chest could be more dire than this. She thought about the phone number. She'd recited it to herself every night before bed for 5 years, a mental lifeline. She thought about the code. The Iron Eagle is nesting. It felt absurd, like a line from a spy movie. She was just a woman in a diner, soaked and beaten down. But she was also a Vance. She pulled out her phone. The battery was at 14%. She looked around the diner. There was a payphone in the back, near the restrooms. It felt more appropriate, more final. She slid out of the booth, leaving the $20 bill on the table. "For the coffee and the trouble," she said to the waitress. She walked to the payphone. Her hands were shaking so hard she could barely punch in the numbers. It was a long, complex international number that she knew by heart, routed through 3 different satellite networks, before landing on a single secure line in a concrete bunker of a room in Geneva. It rang once. A click. No greeting, just a sterile, silent open line. Nora took a deep, shuddering breath. Her voice was a broken whisper. "The Iron Eagle is nesting." A pause. For a terrifying second, she thought she'd gotten the number wrong, that a stranger was listening. Then a voice on the other end. It was male, crisp, and held an accent she couldn't place, a perfect, emotionless, transatlantic sound. "Acknowledged Ms. Vance. Your location is confirmed via cell tower triangulation. A clean phone has been remotely activated. Check the women's restroom 3rd stall inside the sanitary disposal unit. Await instructions. Stand by." Click. He hung up. Nora stood there, the receiver still pressed to her ear. Miss Vance. He had called her Miss Vance. She slowly hung up the phone. Her legs felt weak. She walked into the women's restroom. It was empty. She went to the third stall. Her hand trembled as she opened the small metal box on the wall. Tucked inside, underneath the liner, was a small sealed plastic bag. Inside was a black, featureless burner phone, the kind she'd only seen in movies. She took it out. As if on cue, the screen lit up. A single text message, asset secured. Go to the Pendleton Hotel. A room is booked under your name. A car is 10 minutes out. Black sedan. Do not speak to anyone. We are en route. She walked out of the restroom a different woman than the one who had walked in. The despair was still there, but it was now overlaid with something else. Something cold, sharp, and heavy. The Vances were coming. The Ashfords were celebrating. Matilda, having recovered from the trauma of the morning, was holding court in her living room. Gregory had opened a bottle of what he called 20-year-old scotch. It was a $40 blend he'd poured into a crystal decanter. I tell you, Gregory said, swirling his glass. I feel cleaner. Like we've finally fumigated the house. She was a parasite, Dad. Chloe agreed, scrolling through her phone, probably deleting all the photos that had Nora in the background. I'm just glad Mum finally stood up to her. And Liam. He finally saw the light. Liam, in fact, was not seeing the light. He was sitting in the corner nursing a beer, his stomach in a cold, tight knot. He'd spent the last 8 hours in a state of growing panic. He'd tried calling Nora's phone, but it went straight to voicemail. He'd called the police station, and they'd confirmed she'd been released. Released. Into the rain. With no money. No phone. No him. He had failed. He knew it. The look in her eyes as the police led her away. It was a look of such complete, devastating finality. He had broken her. Liam, stop moping, Matilda snapped, noticing his expression. You should be celebrating. You're free, we're filing for an annulment tomorrow. We'll say she, I don't know, fraudulently misrepresented herself. Which is true. She was a common thief. Now you can finally find a girl from a good family, like Chad. Yeah, buddy, Chad, Chloe's fiancé, said, clapping him on the back. Plenty of fish in the sea, and you just got rid of the carp, the gross bottom feeder one. Liam just nodded, taking another swallow of beer. He felt sick. The celebration was interrupted by a new sound. It started faint, a low, rhythmic whoomp, whoomp, whoomp that seemed to be coming from everywhere at once. Gregory muted the TV. Is that a helicopter? Must be the news for that pile-up on the interstate, Chad said, heading to the window. The sound grew. It wasn't just a sound, it was a vibration. The crystal glasses on the shelf began to chatter. The whump, whump, whump was now a deep, guttural thwup, thwup, thwup that shook the very foundations of the house. My God, Gregory said, joining Chad at the window. It's not on the news, it's here. Matilda and Chloe ran to the window. Their mouths fell open. Descending from the darkening sky, its landing lights like the eyes of an angry god, was a helicopter. But it wasn't a small news chopper. This was a monster. A sleek black military-grade Sikorsky S-92. It was the kind of machine that transported presidents, not suburbanites. It was not landing in the street. It was landing on their lawn. The immaculate 50-foot by 50-foot patch of Kentucky bluegrass that Matilda preened over was now the center of a hurricane. The downdraft flattened her prize-winning rose bushes. It sent patio furniture, the same furniture from yesterday's party, skittering across the flagstones like a lawn gnome was decapitated by a flying lawn chair. "My zoning," Matilda shrieked, a sound of pure, unadulterated suburban rage. "They can't do that. Gregory, call the police. I think—" Liam whispered, his face white as a sheet. "I think they are the police." The massive aircraft settled onto the lawn, with a gentle sigh of hydraulics that seemed to mock the chaos it had caused. The turbines began to wind down, but the presence of the machine was overwhelming. It was an alien, terrifying object in their tiny, manicured world. The side door slid open. But it wasn't a SWAT team that emerged. First, two men in identical, impeccably tailored black suits stepped out. They moved with a fluid, predatory grace. They wore earpieces. They did not look like lawyers. They scanned the property, their eyes missing nothing, and took up positions on either side of the door. Second, a man in a different kind of suit, a dark grey bespoke suit that probably cost more than Gregory's car, stepped out holding a thin silver briefcase. He looked angry. He looked like a man who billed 2,000 an hour and was annoyed to be here. Third, Who is that?" Chloe whispered, her phone now recording this new bizarre event. The third man to emerge was older, in his late 70s, but he moved with a disturbing vitality. He was tall, with a shock of thick white hair. He was wearing a dark cashmere overcoat, despite the mild evening. As he stepped onto the grass, he looked at the house with a look of profound, chilling disappointment. He ignored the stunned faces in the window. He ignored the two men in suits. He turned back to the helicopter and offered his hand. And out of the helicopter, stepping onto the ruined lawn, was Nora. But it was not the Nora they knew. The cheap, worn cardigan was gone. The stringy, rain-soaked hair was gone. This Nora was wearing a sharp, dark wool coat. Her hair had been pulled back into a severe, elegant bun. Her face was pale, her eyes red-rimmed, but her chin was up. She didn't look defeated. She looked like a queen. She stood next to the old man, who put a protective, proprietary arm around her shoulder. "Who is that?" Matilda hissed, her voice a mix of confusion and fear. Liam knew. In that single gut-punching moment, he finally understood. He remembered a story Nora had told him years ago, which he'd dismissed as a fantasy. A story about a grandfather, a large house, and a childhood that seemed too fantastic to be real. He'd thought it was a coping mechanism for an orphan. He looked at the man's wrist. Even from 50 feet away, he recognized the glint of a Patek Philippe Grand Complications watch. He looked at the helicopter now with the Vance family crest discreetly visible on the tail fin. "Oh God," Liam whispered, sinking into a chair. "Oh no." The old man, Cornelius Vance, looked up at the window, his eyes finding Liam's. He didn't glower. He didn't threaten. He just looked disappointed. And that was so much worse. Then the man with the briefcase, Marcus Thorne, looked at his watch and began walking toward the front door. The doorbell rang. The sound was so normal, so mundane, it was almost comical after the arrival of a 10-ton military-grade aircraft. For a moment, no one in the Ashford living room moved. They were frozen, staring at the front door as if expecting it to explode. The bell rang again. 2 sharp, impatient chimes. "Gregory, answer it!" Matilda hissed, finally breaking the spell. Gregory, his face slick with a confused sweat, stumbled to the door. He fumbled with the deadbolt and pulled it open. Standing on his porch were 3 men. The 2 in black suits, Director Shaw, as his ID badge discreetly read, and his subordinate flanked a 3rd man. This was Marcus Thorne, the man with the briefcase. He was average height, with thinning hair and wire-rimmed glasses, but he radiated an aura of such compressed high-stakes intelligence that Gregory instinctively took a step back. He looked like a man who didn't just win lawsuits, he annihilated them. "McGregory Ashford," Thorne asked, his voice a smooth, polished baritone. "Yes, I am Marcus Thorne. I am a partner with the law firm of Skadden Arps, Slate, Mager and Flom. I am here as legal counsel for Mr. Cornelius Vance and his granddaughter Miss Nora Vance, whom I believe you know as Nora Ashford." The use of a real top-tier law firm, a name Gregory associated with hostile takeovers and billion-dollar mergers, hit him like a physical blow. I don't... Thorne didn't wait for an invitation. He simply stepped past Gregory and into the foyer, his 2 security men following, taking up positions that simultaneously blocked the exit and gave them a clear view of the entire ground floor. They didn't look armed, but the bulges under their jackets were not wallets. "Mrs. Matilda Ashford," Thorne said, nodding to the woman who was still clutching her curtains. "Miss Chloe Ashford, Mr. Liam Ashford." He knew all their names. What is the meaning of this? Matilda finally found her voice, her suburban rage overpowering her newfound fear. "You've destroyed my lawn. You're trespassing. I'm calling the police again." "That won't be necessary," Thorne said, his voice laced with ice. "I've already been in contact with Sergeant Riley at the local precinct. He was most interested to learn of the security footage we've just acquired." "Security footage," Gregory stammered. "Indeed. From the diner Nora visited, from the street cameras, and most importantly, from the internal nanny cam your daughter Chloe installed in the hallway, which we discovered with a simple electronic sweep. The one that clearly shows her planting the locket in Nora's room this morning." Chloe made a small, strangled sound, and her phone clattered to the floor. "Slander!" Matilda shrieked. "Lies! We don't have a nanny cam." "You did," Thorne said, tapping his briefcase. "The digital logs are, shall we say, quite clear. Falsifying a police report, Mr. Ashford. That's a felony. Perjury. Conspiracy, shall I continue?" The room was silent save for Chloe's panicked breathing. Thorne clicked open his briefcase. "But that is a matter for the criminal courts. We are here this evening to discuss the civil matter." He pulled out a thick bound document and slapped it onto the coffee table. "This," he said, "is a lawsuit for $50 million. 50 million. Gregory choked, collapsing onto his tacky, overstuffed sofa. "A conservative estimate," Thorne said dryly. "For 3 years of emotional distress, slander, defamation, libel, unlawful imprisonment, and let me check my notes. Oh yes, battery." He looked directly at Matilda. Her face had gone from purple to a pasty, sickly white. "The slap," Thorne continued, his voice devoid of emotion, "was witnessed by no less than 43 guests, many of whom were happy to provide recorded statements to our investigators in exchange for, let's call it, disassociating themselves from this." He wasn't finished. This was just the legal battalion. Now came the financial one. Thorne pulled out a second document. "Now to the more pressing issue. Gregory Ashford. Your company, Ashford Imports." Gregory's head snapped up. "That's none of your business." "It became our business at 9:15 a.m. this morning," Thorne said, "when a holding company owned by Mr. Vance acquired the entirety of your outstanding commercial debt from HSBC. A debt I see of $4.8 million. You can't. We can. And we did. And as the new owners of your debt, we are calling it in. Payment is due in full, as of tomorrow. End of business. I don't have $4.8 million. Gregory was hyperventilating. I'll be ruined. You are already ruined, Mr. Ashford, Thorne said. You just haven't realized it yet. He turned to Matilda. Mrs. Ashford, your charity, the Ashford Fund for Children. Very noble. It's a slush fund. Thorne cut her off. And a very poorly managed one at that. An anonymous tip has already been made to the IRS regarding discrepancies. An audit is scheduled for 8:00 a.m. Monday. We expect them to find exactly what our forensic accountants found this afternoon. He turned to Chloe. Ms. Ashford, your engagement to Mr. Chad Rinaldi, is it? Chad, who had been hiding behind the sofa, winced. The Rinaldi family's construction empire does quite a bit of business with several Vance-owned subsidiaries. Mr. Rinaldi Sr. was devastated to learn of his son's association with a family facing felony fraud charges. The wedding, I'm afraid, is off, and Chad. Your job at your father's company has been re-evaluated. Chad looked like he was going to be sick. The army hadn't fired a shot. They hadn't touched anyone. They had simply, in the space of 5 minutes, dismantled the Ashfords' entire fragile world. Through it all, Nora and her grandfather had stood on the porch just outside the open door, listening. Cornelius Vance had his hand on his granddaughter's shoulder, a silent, grounding presence. Now, as the financial and legal executions concluded, he stepped inside. The 2 security men, Director Shaw and his associate, moved with him, their presence filling the room with a heavy, unspoken threat. They weren't there to hurt anyone. They were there to make sure no one moved in a way they didn't like. They were a physical manifestation of the new power dynamic. The Ashfords were no longer in their own home. They were in a holding cell. Cornelius Vance surveyed the room. He looked at the garish furniture, the cheap art on the walls that terrified broken people. His gaze was not one of rage. It was one of profound anthropological curiosity, as if he were observing a particularly unpleasant species of insect. He looked at Gregory, who was now weeping openly into his hands. He looked at Matilda, who was staring at him, her mouth opening and closing, but no sound coming out. He looked at Chloe, who was rocking back and forth, her social life in cinders. Finally, his eyes landed on Liam. Liam, who had not said a word. He was just staring at Nora, his face a mask of dawning, agonizing horror. This was the woman he had failed. This was the family he had allowed his own to torture. You, Cornelius said. His voice was not loud. It was a low, gravelly rumble, a voice accustomed to absolute, immediate obedience. Liam stood up, his legs shaking. Sir, You had a diamond, Cornelius said, his voice cutting through the man's pathetic excuses. A flawless, priceless diamond. And you let your family treat her like a piece of common glass. I love her, Liam burst out, a desperate final plea. Nora Ellie. I love you. I was scared. I was weak. But I love you. Nora looked at him. The man she had loved, the man she had built her life around. She saw him finally for what he was. Not a monster. Not an evil man. Just a coward. A hollow man, terrified of his own shadow, who had let his weakness curdle into cruelty. "No, you don't," Nora said, her voice clear and strong. It was the first time she had spoken. "You don't love me. You loved the idea of me. The quiet, simple, uncomplicated girl who asked for nothing. The girl who made you feel strong, because she was so worthless." She spat the word back at them, the word Matilda had used. "The second it got hard," Nora continued, stepping away from her grandfather and into the center of the room. "The second I needed you to be a man, to be a husband. You looked at your shoes." "Ellie, please." "I can fix this," he begged. "Fix what, Liam?" Nora asked, her voice dangerously quiet. "Fix the fact that you watched your mother slap me and did nothing. Fix the fact that you let me be arrested. You let me, your wife, get put in a cell to save yourself from an argument with your mother." She walked over to him. He was taller than her, but in that moment he had never seemed so small. "There is nothing to fix," she said. "We are not broken. We are finished." She turned from him. She faced Matilda, who was now clutching her pearls as if they were a life raft. "Was it fun?" Nora asked. I don't. Was it fun?" Nora repeated. "To have someone to hurt, to feel so big by making me feel so small. All those years, all those insults, all that hate. I hope it was worth it. I hope you enjoyed it. Because, as Mr. Thorne said, it's going to cost you $50 million. Nora walked to the hallway. Director Shaw. The security man nodded to his associate, who stepped forward. "Miss Vance, you said you had belongings to retrieve." "Yes," Nora said. "A small box in the guest room." "I'll get it, ma'am," the man said. "No," Nora said firmly. "I will." She held her head high and walked up the stairs, the same stairs she had scrubbed on her hands and knees. Director Shaw followed not to help, but to guard. She entered the small, cramped room. It looked as it had when she'd been dragged out. It didn't feel like her prison anymore. It just felt sad. She didn't pack her clothes. They were all tainted. She went to the small, loose floorboard under the bed, the one place she'd kept her real life. She pulled it up. Inside was a small, velvet-wrapped box. Inside was a simple locket. Not the gaudy one Chloe had planted, but a small platinum locket. Her mother's. The one she had told the Ashfords was lost. She'd lied. She'd hidden it, sensing they would one day take it. She put it on. It felt cool against her skin. She walked back downstairs. Her grandfather, Mr. Thorne, and the second security man were waiting in the foyer. The Ashfords were still frozen in their living room, a tableau of their own destruction. Nora walked past them toward the door. "Nora, wait." It was Liam. He'd run to the foyer, his face undone with desperate, true grief. The grief not of losing a wife, but of realizing he had just lost everything. The money, the status, the one good thing in his life. "Please, don't go. What will I do?" That was the question. Not, what will you do? But, what will I do? Nora stopped at the doorway. She looked back at him, a creature of pity. "I don't know, Liam," she said. "For the first time in your life, I guess you'll have to figure it out for yourself." She turned her back on him and walked out the front door into the night air, which now felt clean and cool. The thwop, thwop, thwop of the helicopter blades started to spin up a promise of escape. The walk across the ruined lawn to the helicopter felt like a mile. The wind from the rotors whipped her hair from its bun, but Nora didn't mind. It felt like it was blowing away the last 3 years of filth and compromise. Cornelius helped her up into the cavernous, leather-lined interior of the S-92. It was quiet inside, the sound of the engines, a distant, powerful hum. Director Shaw and Mr. Thorne climbed in after them, strapping themselves into the passenger seats without a word. The door slid shut, sealing them in. Nora looked out the window. She could see the Ashfords framed in their living room window, like figures in a dollhouse. Gregory was on the phone, probably to a lawyer who wouldn't be able to help him. Matilda had fainted a limp pile on the sofa. And Liam was standing on the porch, his hands in his hair, watching the helicopter, watching his life fly away. The helicopter lifted off a powerful vertical ascent. The house, the manicured street, the whole tiny, toxic neighborhood shrank beneath them until it was just another patch in the suburban quilt. Nora kept watching until it was gone. "Are you all right, my dear?" Cornelius asked, his voice a low rumble. He had taken her hand, his own large, warm and solid. Nora nodded, a single tear finally escaping and tracing a clean path down her cheek. It wasn't a tear of sadness. It was a tear of release. "I am now Grandpa." She whispered the name, feeling foreign and familiar on her tongue. "You did well," he said, patting her hand. "The test was harder than I ever intended. I wanted you to find love, not that." "I thought it was love," Nora said, looking at her hands, the small, faint white scars from the broken glass still visible. "I really did. I thought his weakness was just gentleness. I thought his fear was modesty." "They are often mistaken for one another," Cornelius said, "until the fire. In the fire you find out what a person is really made of. Tin or steel." "He was tin," Nora said. "He was tin," Cornelius agreed. They flew in silence for a while, the lights of the city spreading out below them like a carpet of diamonds. What happens to them?" Nora asked, not because she cared, but because she needed to know. "Mr. Thorne." Cornelius nodded to the lawyer who was already on his laptop. Thorne looked up, adjusting his glasses. "Ms. Vance, the criminal charges against the Ashford family for filing a false police report conspiracy and for Mrs. Ashford battery will proceed. Given the evidence, a conviction is all but certain. They will likely avoid jail time, being first offenders, but the probation and fines will be significant. And the civil suit. Mr. Vance has instructed me to pursue it to the fullest extent," Thorne said. "We will not see 50 million, of course. They don't have it. But we will take everything they do have. The house will be foreclosed to cover the debt. The business is already in receivership. Gregory Ashford will be lucky to get a job as a greeter at Walmart. Mrs. Ashford's charity is being dissolved by the State Attorney General. Chloe Ashford has, I believe, already been served with the restraining order Chad's family filed against her." He said it all with the mild, dispassionate tone of a man reading a weather report. "And Liam?" Nora asked. "He is included in all civil and criminal proceedings as a co-conspirator by way of his inaction. He will be as ruined as the rest of them. He will be bankrupt by Christmas." Nora nodded. She felt nothing. Not pity, not satisfaction. Just empty. It was the nothing of a closed door. "Good," she said, and she was surprised to find she meant it. "Where are we going?" she asked, turning to her grandfather. "Home," he said, smiling. "To New York. It's time for Nora Vance to come back to the world. You've been gone too long." The helicopter banked east toward the rising sun. Nora leaned her head against the cool window. She was free. She was no longer Nora Hart, the library assistant. She was no longer Nora Ashford, the worthless wife. She was Nora Vance, and her private army of lawyers of security, of devastating financial power, was just a phone call away. But as she looked at her own reflection in the glass, at the strong, tired but unbroken woman, looking back, she had a feeling she wouldn't be needing them. She had survived the fire, and she had learned the hard way that she was not made of tin. She was made of steel. Thank you for watching this story. It's a powerful reminder that a person's worth is never ever determined by the people who try to tear them down. Nora's in-laws saw her as worthless because they were so blinded by their own insecurity and greed. They forgot the most important rule: never ever underestimate a quiet woman. You never know what kind of power or what kind of army she has behind her. What did you think of the Ashfords' takedown? Was it too much, or was it exactly the karma they deserved? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you loved this story and want to hear more tales of dramatic karma, stunning twists and powerful comebacks, please hit that like button, share this video with someone who needs to see it, and be sure to subscribe to the channel. We have new stories coming every week, and you won't want to miss a single one. In the glittering world of the ultra-rich, secrets are the most valuable currency. Solomon York, a real estate titan worth billions, believed he controlled everything and everyone in his life. He decided to treat his ambitious young mistress to the ultimate fantasy, a front-row seat at Paris Fashion Week. He flew her there on his private jet, draped her in diamonds, and paraded her through the city of love. But in the most public way imaginable, he was about to discover a devastating truth. He thought he was giving his lover the world. He never imagined his wife already owned it. This is the story of how a quiet, underestimated wife orchestrated the most brilliant corporate takedown, disguised as a fashion show. Solomon York believed the world operated on a simple set of principles: power, leverage, and the quiet, inevitable submission of those with less of either. His world was one of steel and glass towers scraping the New York skyline, of brutal boardroom negotiations, and of a net worth that ticked upwards with the relentless certainty of the atomic clock. His marriage to Genevieve Ainsworth was, in his mind, another one of his successful acquisitions. She was perfect, the daughter of old money. She possessed a quiet grace and an intellect she kept politely sheathed, like a decorative sword hung over a mantelpiece. For 12 years she had been the impeccable hostess, the serene partner, the tastefully dressed woman on his arm at charity galas. She ran their formidable Fifth Avenue penthouse and their sprawling Connecticut estate with the frictionless efficiency of a Swiss watch. He saw her as the custodian of his domestic life, the curator of their social standing, and, if he were being honest with himself, a beautiful, placid object that confirmed his own status. He loved her, of course, in the way a king loves his most prized and peaceful territory. But peace bored him. Katrina Petrova, or Kat, as she insisted, was the antithesis of peace. She was a fiery, ambitious 26-year-old with a mane of raven hair, eyes that devoured everything they saw, and an appetite for life that Solomon found intoxicatingly crass. He'd met her at a gallery opening 6 months prior. She was a fledgling handbag designer with more ambition than capital, and she had targeted him with the precision of a heat-seeking missile. The affair was a shot of adrenaline in his meticulously ordered life. With Kat, he wasn't just a CEO. He was a benefactor, a mentor, a god. He funded her fledgling brand, Petrova, and in return, she made him feel young, reckless, and desired in a way Genevieve's calm, measured affection no longer did. The lie about Paris Fashion Week was constructed with the same casual arrogance with which Solomon structured a billion-dollar deal. "Geneva," he'd announced over dinner one Tuesday evening, the crystal glasses on their polished mahogany table gleaming under the soft light of a chandelier. "The Lehman Group is holding an urgent European summit. I'll be gone for the week." Genevieve looked up from her plate of pan-seared scallops, her expression unreadable. Her eyes, a cool, intelligent grey, met his. "Geneva? So suddenly? You know how it is. A new acquisition on the table. They need the big guns," he said, taking a self-important sip of his Montrachet. "It'll be dreadfully dull. Nothing but conference rooms and stale croissants." He felt a familiar, faint pang of guilt, but he smothered it. Genevieve never questioned him. It was part of their arrangement, unspoken but absolute. He provided the world, and she lived in it gracefully. Her life was her book clubs, her charity committees, her art history lectures. What would she know of the cutthroat world of international finance, or the vibrant, pulsing energy of Paris Fashion Week? The truth was, the trip was for Kat. It was to be her coronation. For months, she had been dropping hints, her voice a seductive purr. "Everyone who is anyone will be in Paris," she'd say, scrolling through fashion blogs on her phone as she lay in the bed of their secret downtown apartment. To be seen there. "Solomon, it would change everything for my brand." He'd made the calls, front row seats to the most anticipated show of the week, Atelier Céleste. It was the hottest new name in haute couture, a brand that had appeared out of nowhere a year ago with an almost endless well of funding and a mysterious, visionary creative director. Getting a ticket was harder than getting a private audience with the Pope. But Solomon York always got what he wanted. A call to a contact at a French bank, a subtle mention of a future real estate deal, and 2 coveted invitations were messengered to his office. The night before his departure, he found Genevieve in the library, curled in a worn leather armchair with a book. She was wearing simple silk pajamas, her blonde hair pulled back, and she looked ethereal in the lamplight. For a moment, seeing her like that, so serene and unassuming, he felt a surge of something he might have called affection. "All packed?" she asked, not looking up from her page. "Almost. Just need to throw some suits in a bag," he replied, leaning against the doorframe. "Don't let the place fall apart while I'm gone." She finally looked up, a small, knowing smile playing on her lips. It was a smile he'd seen 1,000 times, but tonight it seemed different. Sharper. "I'm sure I'll manage. You know, it's funny." "What's that?" "My old university roommate, Sophie Dubois. She's a director at a new fashion house. They're showing in Paris this week. She's been begging me to come for months," Genevieve said, her tone light and conversational. Solomon's blood ran cold for a second. "Oh? And you're not going?" She laughed, a soft, airy sound. "Goodness, no. Can you imagine me in that circus? All those photographers and preening models. It's not my world, Solomon. Besides, who would manage the caterers for the hospital fundraiser on Saturday?" She closed her book and stood up. "Have a safe flight to Geneva. I'll see you in a week." She kissed him on the cheek, her lips cool, her scent a familiar blend of jasmine and paper from her book. He watched her walk out of the room, her posture perfect, her presence utterly calming. The relief that washed over him was immense. Of course she wouldn't go. Fashion was frivolous, a circus, as she'd called it. She was Genevieve Ainsworth York, a woman of substance and quiet hobbies. She belonged here, in this library, surrounded by old books and comfortable silence. He was wrong. So profoundly, catastrophically wrong. While he was packing his suits for a week of deception, Genevieve was finalizing the culmination of a 2-year, multi-million-dollar plan. Her flight to Paris had been booked for 6 months. She wasn't going to see the show. She was going to host it. The York Industries Gulfstream G650 sliced through the clouds, a silver dart carrying Solomon and Kat towards their Parisian fantasy. Inside, the cabin was a cocoon of cream leather and polished burr walnut. Kat, giddy with champagne and the sheer altitude of her new life, snapped selfies, the diamond bracelet Solomon had gifted her sparkling under the jet's soft lighting. "Look at us," she squealed, showing him a picture on her phone. "We look like royalty. No one in my graduating class would ever believe this." Solomon smiled, a proprietary warmth spreading through his chest. He was the architect of this dream. "Get used to it, sweetheart. This is just the beginning." He saw himself reflected in her admiring eyes, powerful, generous, the master of the universe. Their suite at Le Bristol was a symphony in opulence. It wasn't just a room. It was a sprawling apartment overlooking the Rue du Faubourg Saint-Honoré, with a private terrace, a marble bathroom the size of Kat's old studio, and a butler on call. Flowers filled every surface. Kat's favorite crimson roses, a detail Solomon's assistant had arranged. "It's a palace, Solomon, a real palace." Kat spun around in the center of the living room, her arms outstretched. For the next 2 days, Solomon played the part of the magnanimous benefactor to perfection. He took Kat on a shopping spree down Avenue Montaigne, not batting an eye as she racked up bills at Chanel, Dior, and a boutique jeweler named Jar, whose pieces were known only to the world's wealthiest. He watched, amused and pleased, as she transformed. The girl from Queens was shedding her skin, emerging as a polished, couture-clad woman who looked, to the untrained eye, like she belonged. He, however, found the whole fashion ecosystem faintly ridiculous. The peacocking men, the painfully thin women, the hushed, reverent tones used to describe a handbag. It was all a game, and a silly one at that. It lacked the gravitas of his world, the cold, hard mathematics of a real estate deal, where concrete and steel were the prizes. "This designer, Celeste," Kat babbled over lunch at L'Ambroisie, a 3 Michelin-star restaurant where the reservations were as coveted as the fashion show tickets. No one knows who she is. They say she's a total recluse. But the money behind the brand, it's insane. They call the investor Aura Ventures. Apparently, they've poured over 100 million into it in less than 2 years. They poached the best pattern cutters from Valentino and the best embroiderers from Lesage. Solomon swirled the deep red Bordeaux in his glass, feigning interest. 100 million? Probably some Russian oligarch's new plaything or a tech billionaire with more money than sense. This whole industry is built on smoke and mirrors. It's a bubble, Kat. Remember that. But it's a beautiful bubble, she sighed, gazing out the window. And we're in it. Meanwhile, across the city, in the less ostentatious but infinitely more chic 7th arrondissement, Genevieve Ainsworth was operating with the cool precision of a field marshal. Her base of operations was not a hotel suite, but a discreet private apartment she owned under a holding company, a place Solomon didn't even know existed. Her days were not filled with shopping, but with a relentless schedule of meetings. Her right-hand man, Léo Dubois, brother to her old friend Sophie, was the public-facing CEO of Atelier Céleste. He was a sharp, impeccably dressed Parisian in his late 40s who understood both the art and the commerce of fashion. "The final fitting is complete," Léo reported, standing in Genevieve's sunlit study. Papers and fabric swatches were laid out on a large oak desk, a stark contrast to the hedonistic clutter of Solomon's hotel suite. "The lighting rig at the Musée Rodin is being installed as we speak. Security is confirmed. The press is frantic. Vogue is running a pre-show feature on the mystery of Celeste." Genevieve looked up from a complex financial spreadsheet on her laptop. She wore no makeup, her hair was tied back in a simple knot, and she was dressed in a crisp white shirt and tailored trousers. Here, she was not Mrs. York, the society wife. She was G.A., the enigmatic founder of Aura Ventures. "And the guest list?" she asked, her voice calm and steady. "Confirmed. I took the liberty of cross-referencing Mr. York's known associates. David Chen of Chen Global Investments RSVP'd yes. So did a few board members from his banking partners. They will all be in attendance." Leo paused, his expression carefully neutral. "And the special invitations for Mr. York and his guest. They were seated as you requested. Front row, Section A. Directly opposite the main camera platform." A faint smile touched Genevieve's lips. "Excellent. I want a clear shot." "Genevieve," Leo said, his tone softening. "Are you certain about this? The reveal. It will be a nuclear event. You could simply let the brand's success be its own statement." She turned her chair to face the window, looking out over the quiet, elegant Parisian rooftops. "For 12 years, Solomon has seen me as a decoration, a well-managed asset. He thinks my greatest challenge in a day is deciding on a floral arrangement. He built his empire on my family's name and my inheritance, which he managed for me, folding it into his own company, so seamlessly I was told it was for tax efficiency. He used my capital to build his throne, and then sat me beside it and told me to be quiet." She turned back to Leo, and her grey eyes were no longer calm. They were chips of granite. "This isn't just a statement, Leo. This is a reclamation. Atelier Celeste is the first thing I have ever built that is entirely mine. I funded it through a trust my grandmother left me, one even Solomon's army of lawyers couldn't touch. He thinks fashion is frivolous. He's about to learn that it's a multi-billion-dollar industry, and the decoration he left at home is about to become his biggest competitor." Her phone buzzed. It was a text from the manager of their Connecticut estate. Mr. York's office requested a copy of the prenuptial agreement be sent to his personal lawyer this morning. Just confirming I have sent the encrypted file as per your standing instructions. Genevieve typed back a simple, "Thank you." She had installed the manager, a fiercely loyal woman, years ago. She had known this was coming. Solomon was getting ready to discard her for a newer model. He was checking the terms of their exit contract. She looked at Leo. "Full steam ahead. It's time the king learned the queen is a player too." The day before the show was a blur of calculated indulgence for Solomon and Kat. He took her to the Musée d'Orsay, pontificating loudly on the Impressionists, a subject he'd skimmed in an art history course at Wharton. He presented it as fact, another market to be understood and mastered. Kat, dressed in a ridiculously expensive Balmain dress, nodded along, more interested in taking photos for her Instagram feed than in Monet's brushstrokes. That evening, he secured a last-minute reservation at Giraffe, a restaurant famed for its breathtaking direct view of the Eiffel Tower. The air was electric, filled with the chatter of models, designers, and industry power players. It was the place to be, and Solomon felt a smug satisfaction at having procured a prime table. "To us," he toasted, clinking his champagne flute against Kat's, "and to the future of Petrova handbags." "I can't wait for the show tomorrow," Kat sighed, her eyes sparkling as much as the glittering tower in the distance. "Atelier Celeste. It just sounds so powerful." As they were waiting for their main course, Solomon's phone buzzed. It was an email from his New York office with an urgent subject line, "Unexpected movement in Aura Ventures." Curious, he opened it. It was a brief from his financial intelligence team. Aura Ventures, the mysterious firm backing Atelier Celeste, had just made another move. They had acquired a majority stake in a high-end Italian leather tannery, the very one that supplied York Holdings' new luxury hotel developments. It was a direct, strategic strike into his supply chain. "Damn it," he muttered. "What's wrong?" Kat asked, her brow furrowing. "Nothing." "Business?" he said dismissively. "Some aggressive new player in Europe. Don't worry about it." But it irked him. It was a bold, almost arrogant move, the kind of move he would make. Who the hell was behind this firm? At that very moment, less than 50 feet away, on the other side of the terrace, Genevieve was concluding a dinner meeting with the owners of that same Italian tannery. With her were Leo Dubois and her lead counsel. She was dressed in a simple but exquisitely cut black dress from her own collection, her identity shielded by the dim lighting and her discreet table choice. She had seen Solomon and Kat walk in. Her heart had given a single, painful thud, not of jealousy, but of a cold, final resolve. She watched them for a moment, his loud, performative gestures, Kat's enraptured gaze. They were a cliché, and seeing it in the flesh only hardened her determination. "The deal is signed," the elderly Italian gentleman, Signore Vittori, said, shaking her hand. "It is an honor to be in business with a true visionary, Mademoiselle Ainsworth." Genevieve smiled warmly. "The honor is mine, Signore. Your family's craftsmanship is unparalleled. It will be the foundation of our new accessories line." As her party prepared to leave, her lawyer, a sharp woman named Helene, gestured subtly with her head toward Solomon's table. "Are you all right?" "Perfectly," Genevieve said, her voice even. "Ignorance, I find, is a very vulnerable position." They chose a path to the exit that kept a large planter and a stream of waiters between them and Solomon's table. But as they neared the door, a woman at a nearby table, an American socialite Genevieve knew from New York charity circles, looked up, and her eyes widened in recognition. "Genevieve! Genevieve York, is that you?" the woman called out, her voice carrying across the terrace. Solomon's head snapped up. He squinted into the dim light. He saw the back of a woman with blonde hair in a chignon, wearing a black dress, quickly exiting the restaurant. For a split second, his brain registered a jarring familiarity in her posture, the elegant line of her neck. "What was that?" Kat asked. "Nothing," Solomon said, shaking his head. "I thought I heard. Never mind." He dismissed it instantly. "Genevieve in Paris? At Giraffe?" Impossible. She was in Connecticut, organizing a bake sale or whatever it was she did. The woman he saw was probably just another blonde socialite. The city was full of them. He took another gulp of champagne, pushing the unsettling flicker of coincidence from his mind. It was a ghost, a trick of the light. Back in the safety of her car, Genevieve's composure finally cracked for a moment. Her hands trembled slightly as she clasped them in her lap. "That was close," Leo said from the seat opposite her. "Too close," she agreed, taking a deep breath. "It changes nothing. The final pieces are in motion. Tomorrow, there will be nowhere to hide." The near miss, however, had planted a seed. Solomon, for the rest of the dinner, felt a strange, undefinable unease. He watched Kat prattle on about her designs, but his mind kept drifting back to that fleeting glimpse of the woman in the black dress, the sound of his wife's name echoing in the chic Parisian air. He dismissed it as a symptom of his own guilt, a phantom limb of his conscience. He ordered another bottle of champagne, determined to drown the ghost. The day of the Atelier Celeste show dawned grey and moody, the Parisian sky threatening rain. The atmosphere did nothing to dampen the electric anticipation that crackled through the city. By late afternoon, the grounds of the Musée Rodin were swarming. A legion of photographers formed a chaotic, flashbulb popping gauntlet at the entrance. Black cars with tinted windows lined the street, depositing a stream of celebrities, industry titans, and fashion editors dressed in their most audacious attire. Solomon, wearing a custom-tailored Tom Ford suit, guided Kat through the melee. She was a vision in a shimmering, silver dress, a piece from a rival designer that had cost a small fortune. She was nervous and exhilarated, clutching his arm tightly. Solomon, by contrast, felt a familiar sense of command. This was a crowd of peacocks, and he was a lion. "Smile," he murmured to Kat as the flashes erupted around them. "Look like you belong here." Inside, the venue was breathtaking. A massive temporary structure had been erected in the museum's famous sculpture garden. The runway was a stark white path that snaked around Rodin's iconic The Thinker, which was dramatically lit. The juxtaposition of classical art and modern fashion was a statement in itself. Bold, intelligent, and expensive. Their seats were, as promised, in the center of the front row. They were flanked by a famous actress on one side and a stern-looking woman with a severe black bob, whom Kat identified in a panicked whisper as Anna Wintour's fictional counterpart, the editor-in-chief of Global Vogue. Solomon scanned the crowd, nodding curtly at a few business acquaintances. He saw David Chen, a savvy tech investor from Hong Kong, with whom he had co-financed a skyscraper in Shanghai. David was sitting a few seats down, and when he caught Solomon's eye, he didn't smile. He gave a small, almost imperceptible shake of his head, his expression one of pity or warning. Solomon frowned, perplexed. What was that about? As they waited for the show to begin, the air buzzed with gossip. The whispers were all about the mysterious investor, G.A. of Aura Ventures. "Heard it's an Emirati royal," a woman behind him whispered. No, darling. My source says it's a recluse from Silicon Valley who cashed out of a cryptocurrency and is now bored," her companion replied. "The only thing anyone knows for sure," a third voice added, "is that G.A. has impossibly deep pockets and an iron will. Leo Dubois is the face, but G.A. pulls every single string. They approved every sketch, every fabric, every model in this show." Solomon listened with detached amusement. It was the kind of myth-making he understood. Create an aura of mystery, and people would lean in, desperate to know more. It was a good marketing strategy, frivolous but effective. Kat, however, was hanging on every word. "G.A., she breathed. "I wonder who it is. Can you imagine having that much power? To create all this? Just from an idea." "Money isn't power, Kat. It's a tool," Solomon corrected her loftily. "The power is in the person who wields it. This G.A. is probably some bored heir who hired the right people." He felt a sudden, inexplicable need to diminish the faceless investor, to shrink their accomplishment down to something mundane. The lights began to dim, and a hush fell over the crowd. A single, haunting cello note filled the space. The show was beginning. Solomon settled back in his seat, a feeling of supreme satisfaction washing over him. Here he was, at the heart of it all, with a beautiful woman on his arm. He had bent the world to his will to be here, to give her this moment. He felt magnanimous, powerful. He thought of Genevieve, probably at home reading a book, blissfully unaware. He felt a pang of condescending pity for her small, quiet world. She would never understand this, the ambition, the glamour, the sheer, intoxicating thrill of being at the center of the universe. Suddenly, a man in a sharp suit, one of the event's organizers, hurried over to them, leaning down to speak into Solomon's ear. "Monsieur York, my apologies," the man said in a hushed, urgent tone. "There has been a small mix-up with the seating chart." We have you and your guest listed under a personal invitation from our founder." Solomon raised an eyebrow. "I arranged these seats through my own contacts." The man looked flustered. "Yes, of course, but the master list comes directly from our investor. You are listed as guests of honor. There is a note." He discreetly passed Solomon a small, thick card. Solomon took it. The cardstock was heavy, expensive. On it, in elegant, familiar calligraphy, were 3 words: "Enjoy the show." He stared at the handwriting. His blood turned to ice. It was Genevieve's. Unmistakable. He knew it from 1,000 thank-you notes, grocery lists, and loving messages left on his desk over 12 years. His heart began to hammer against his ribs. It couldn't be. A coincidence. Someone with similar handwriting. A practical joke. His mind raced, desperately trying to find a logical explanation, but finding none. He looked back at David Chen, who was now watching him with an expression of grim certainty. The near miss at the restaurant, the sound of her name, the strange warning from his financial team about Aura Ventures. The pieces of the puzzle, once scattered and meaningless, were now snapping together with terrifying speed. "Solomon, what is it? You're white as a sheet," Kat whispered, her hand on his arm. He couldn't answer. He just stared at the elegant script on the card. G.A. Genevieve. Ainsworth. The first model stepped onto the runway, a celestial vision in flowing white silk, but Solomon didn't see her. All he could see was the abyss that had just opened up at his feet. The show he had brought his mistress to, as a display of his power, was not his to command. He wasn't a king in a foreign court. He was a fool in a theater built by his own wife. The show was a triumph. Even Solomon, in his state of cold, creeping dread, could recognize that. It was more than a collection of clothes. It was a narrative. The designs began with soft, ethereal pieces in whites and creams, fabrics that seemed to float down the runway. Then, gradually, the collection transitioned. The colors deepened to slate gray, then charcoal, then a defiant, shimmering black. The silhouettes became sharper, more structured. What began as romance evolved into power. It was armor, forged from silk, leather, and sequins. It was the story of a transformation. The audience was rapt. Phones were up, but not just for pictures. People were recording, absorbing, witnessing the birth of a fashion supernova. The final piece was a showstopper. A floor-length coat of black cashmere, its interior lined with a blaze of hand-stitched ruby-red sequins, worn by a top model who walked with the confidence of a warrior queen. As she made her final turn, the coat flared open, revealing the fiery secret within. The message was clear. Beneath the quiet exterior lies a core of fire. A storm of applause erupted, a deafening roar of approval. The models did their final walk together, and then the creative director, the elusive Celeste, finally appeared. She was a young, brilliant-looking woman with cropped hair and an avant-garde sense of style. She took a shy, grateful bow. Solomon sat frozen, his champagne flute untouched, his hands clenched into fists on his knees. Kat was beside herself, clapping enthusiastically. "Oh my God, Solomon, wasn't that incredible? That last coat, the power. This is it. This is everything I want my brand to be." He barely heard her. He was waiting. The card in his pocket felt like a block of ice pressed against his skin. He knew this wasn't the end. The real finale was yet to come. The young designer, Celeste, took a microphone that was handed to her. Her voice, amplified through the space, was filled with emotion. "Thank you. Thank you all so much," she said in a charming French accent. "I am the hands that sketched these designs, but I am not the heart of Atelier Celeste. There is one person whose vision, whose courage, and whose unwavering belief made every stitch of this possible. For 2 years, she has chosen to remain in the shadows, guiding us, funding us, and inspiring us. She is the founder of Aura Ventures and the soul of this house. Tonight, she has decided to step into the light. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome G.A., Mademoiselle Genevieve Ainsworth. The name hung in the air for a single, silent second. For Solomon, time seemed to warp and stretch. He saw Kat's head whip around to look at him, her face a mask of utter confusion. He saw the lenses of a dozen cameras swing away from the stage and point directly at him. He saw David Chen close his eyes, as if in sympathy for the coming slaughter. And then she appeared. Genevieve walked out from backstage, not to the end of the runway, but to a podium set up near the front. She was not the woman he had left in Connecticut. This was a stranger. She wore a custom-made tuxedo, a stunning piece from her own collection, tailored to perfection. Her blonde hair was styled in a sleek, powerful way. Her face was calm, her grey eyes sweeping over the astonished crowd, missing nothing. She radiated an aura of absolute control. The room erupted in a chaotic flurry of flashes and shouted questions. The revelation was a bombshell. Genevieve Ainsworth York, the quiet society wife, was the phantom mogul behind the most talked-about brand in the world. She held up a hand, and an improbable silence fell. "Good evening," she said, her voice crisp and clear, carrying to every corner of the vast space. For a long time, I believed that a person's value was reflected in the success of others, a husband, a family. I was wrong. I learned that true value comes from what you build yourself. Her eyes, cold and brilliant as diamonds, found Solomon in the front row. She didn't glare, she didn't smirk. She simply held his gaze, a silent acknowledgement across a chasm of betrayal. It was a look that said, "I see you, and I know you see me. Finally." Atelier Celeste and Aura Ventures were built on a simple principle, she continued, her voice never wavering. To invest in the overlooked, in the talent that is underestimated, in the beauty that is dismissed as frivolous, in the strength that is mistaken for quiet compliance. Every word was a perfectly aimed dart, striking Solomon with surgical precision. He felt his face burning, the collective stare of the entire fashion world pressing down on him. He could feel Kat beside him, trembling, beginning to understand the magnitude of what was happening. This wasn't a fashion show, it was an execution. "We are proud to announce tonight that Aura Ventures has completed its initial phase of acquisitions," Genevieve announced, shifting her focus to the wider audience, to the business press now scribbling furiously. "Including a controlling interest in Vittori Tanneries of Florence, and we are launching our own line of luxury leather goods next fall." Another dart, a direct shot at his own supply chain. She finished her speech with a confident smile. "This is only the beginning. We are not just building a brand, we are building an empire." "Thank you." The applause was titanic, a wave of shock and admiration. Genevieve gave a final, regal nod, and then turned and walked off stage, disappearing behind the curtain as mysteriously as she had arrived. The lights came up. The spell was broken. Chaos ensued. "Genevieve?" Kat whispered, her voice barely audible. "Your wife? But how? You said she was at a book club." The naive dream in her eyes was dying, replaced by the horrified realization that she was not a princess in a fairy tale, but a pawn in a brutal game of chess she never even knew she was playing. Solomon didn't answer. He couldn't. He was suffocating, drowning in the public glare. His phone was vibrating non-stop in his pocket with calls and texts. He saw reporters and photographers starting to surge towards him. He stood up, knocking over his chair, and grabbed Kat's arm. "We're leaving. Now." He was Solomon York. He was a titan. But in that moment, under the brilliant lights of the runway that his wife had built, he had never felt so small. He was no longer the lion. He was the prey. The retreat from the Musée Rodin was a humiliating scramble. What should have been a triumphant exit was a panicked flight. Solomon, for the first time in his adult life, was not in control. He shoved his way through the encroaching scrum of reporters, shielding his face with one hand while dragging a stunned and stumbling Kat with the other. "Mr. York, were you aware of your wife's business? Is it true your company is now competing with hers? What does this mean for your marriage?" The questions were like shrapnel, flying at him from all directions. He ignored them, his jaw clenched so tightly it ached. He finally bundled a sobbing Kat into their waiting car and barked at the driver. "LeBristol, go!" The silence in the car was thick and suffocating, broken only by Kat's quiet weeping. "You knew," she finally choked out, looking at him with red-rimmed eyes full of betrayal. "You must have known." "Don't be ridiculous! Do you think I would have brought you here if I knew?" He snapped, his voice raw with fury and humiliation. "She played me. She played all of us." "She played you," Kat corrected, a new, hard edge to her voice. "I was just the stage decoration for your public hanging. This whole trip, the dresses, the jewelry, it was all to make your humiliation more complete, wasn't it? To have your mistress right there in the front row while your wife took over the world?" The truth of her words hit him like a physical blow. It was diabolically brilliant. It wasn't just about revealing her power. It was about exposing his weakness, his infidelity, his utter blindness on a global stage. Back in the gilded cage of their hotel suite, the full scale of the disaster began to unfold. Solomon's phone was a non-stop barrage of alerts. Financial news sites had already published the story. Society wife revealed as G.A., the mystery mogul behind Atelier Céleste. The articles weren't just about fashion, they were about business. They highlighted Aura Ventures' strategic acquisitions, framing Genevieve not as a jilted wife getting revenge, but as a shrewd and formidable new player in the luxury market. They juxtaposed her stunning success with photos of Solomon fleeing the venue with his young mistress. The narrative was set. She was the brilliant strategist. He was the foolish, philandering husband. A text from his CFO lit up the screen. "Market pre-trading shows York Holdings down 8%. The Vittori Tannery acquisition is a major blow to the supply chain for our hotel division. We need a statement, Solomon. Now." He ignored it and tried to call Genevieve. It went straight to a disconnected number. He tried her personal assistant in New York. The assistant, with an icily polite tone, informed him that she no longer worked for Mrs. York, but for Miss Ainsworth, and she could not put him through. He was locked out, completely and utterly. Then came the call from his lawyer, a bulldog named Frank. "I hope you're sitting down, Solomon," Frank said, his voice grim. "I've been on the phone for the last hour with her legal team. They contacted me the moment she walked on that stage. They've filed for divorce." "Let them," Solomon snarled. "The prenup is ironclad. She gets the penthouse and a settlement. That's it." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Solomon, the prenup might not be as ironclad as you think. Her lawyers are claiming fraudulent inducement and a breach of fiduciary duty." "What the hell does that mean?" "It means," Frank said slowly, "that they have records. Impeccable, detailed records, going back 12 years. They claim you systematically and intentionally commingled the initial seed money from her Ainsworth family trust, the money you were supposed to be managing for her, into York Holdings' foundational assets. They're arguing that a significant portion of what you consider your empire was built on her capital, which you used without her full, informed consent. They're not coming for a settlement, Solomon. They're coming for a foundational percentage of York Holdings itself. Solomon felt the blood drain from his face. That can't be right. The money was a pittance at the time, but with interest, with the growth of the company. And there's more, Frank continued. They also have a mountain of evidence regarding your affair. Credit card statements for an apartment, receipts for jewelry, travel itineraries. They're going to use the public humiliation clause. The stunt she pulled tonight wasn't just personal. It was a calculated legal maneuver to document your infidelity in the most public way possible, maximizing her leverage. The room started to spin. The library. Genevieve saying, "It's not my world." The book she was reading. He remembered the title now. It was The Art of War. He looked over at Kat, who was now packing her bags with frantic, angry movements. Her dream was over. Her Petrova brand, funded by him, was now toxic. Her association with him had made her infamous overnight, not as a designer, but as the clueless mistress in a billionaire's downfall. "Where are you going?" he asked, his voice hollow. "Away from you," she spat, zipping a suitcase full of clothes he'd bought her. "You didn't make me, Solomon. You used me. And she, your wife, she is terrifying. And honestly, good for her." She walked to the door, paused and looked back at him, her face a mixture of pity and disgust. "You never even saw her, did you? You were married to a queen, and you were too busy playing with a pawn to notice." The door slammed shut, leaving Solomon alone in the cavernous suite, surrounded by the beautiful, expensive things that suddenly felt like relics of a fallen empire. The news on the television was now showing a photo of Genevieve from the show, looking powerful and serene, next to a photo of him, looking panicked and foolish. The headline read, "The Empress's New Clothes, How Genevieve Ainsworth York Built a Secret Empire." His phone rang again. It was the chairman of his board. He braced himself and answered it. The fallout was just beginning. 6 months later, the world had been remade. Solomon York discovered this not in a boardroom or a stock market report, but in the sterile, transient limbo of a private airport lounge. He was waiting for a delayed flight to Zurich, for a meeting he now had to attend in person, a humbling affair where he once would have dispatched a subordinate. A discarded copy of Forbes lay on the table beside him. And there she was, Genevieve. It was not the soft, placid Genevieve of his memory. The woman on the cover was an entirely different entity. She wore the same custom-tailored tuxedo from the Paris show, a garment that had since become iconic. She stood not in a lavish home, but in a brightly lit design studio, one hand resting on a mood board covered in sketches and fabric swatches. Her gaze was directed just past the camera, as if focused on a distant horizon only she could see. There was no hint of a smile, only a profound and unsettling serenity. Her power wasn't projected, it was simply a state of being. The headline was a masterpiece of brutal simplicity. "The silent partner is silent no more. Genevieve Ainsworth on building a billion-dollar brand in secret." A wave of cold fury washed over Solomon, so intense it made him dizzy. He snatched the magazine, his fingers creasing the glossy paper. He read the article, each word a fresh humiliation. It detailed her meticulous 2-year plan, her brilliant use of her grandmother's inviolable trust, and the formation of Aura Ventures. It praised her disruptive approach, her quiet tenacity, her visionary leadership. His name was mentioned only once, in a single, surgically precise sentence. Ainsworth's professional ambitions took shape during her 12-year marriage to real estate developer Solomon York. He was a footnote, a historical detail in the biography of a titan. The divorce had been less of a battle and more of a systematic dismantling. Solomon had stormed into the initial negotiations, expecting to leverage his power, to crush her with the weight of his legal team. He was met not with emotion, but with spreadsheets. Genevieve sat opposite him, flanked by her lawyers, and presented a case so meticulously documented, it was irrefutable. She had binders, transaction records, and archived emails tracing the exact path of her Ainsworth family capital from the day he had condescendingly offered to manage it for her. "You see, Solomon," she had said, her voice utterly devoid of malice, as if explaining a simple mathematical equation. "When you used my $75 million to secure the leverage for the acquisition of the Meridian Tower project in 2013, you didn't just borrow my money. You made me a foundational partner. According to the growth of that asset, my initial stake is now valued at just over $900 million. She had done that for 3 separate cornerstone deals. She wasn't coming for alimony. She was collecting on an investment he never knew she'd made. The court had agreed. To pay the settlement, he had been forced to sell the Meridian Tower itself, the jewel in his corporate crown, along with another landmark building. He was still a billionaire, but his empire was fractured. His net worth had plummeted by 1/3, and his reputation for infallible business acumen was shattered. The fallout radiated through his daily life. The air in the York Holdings offices had changed. The deference he was once shown was now tinged with something new: pity. Board members questioned his judgment in hushed tones. Ambitious young rivals, who once wouldn't have dared challenge him, were now circling his weakened assets like sharks. He was the man who had been so blind he hadn't noticed an empire being built under his own roof. How could he be trusted to see the next big market shift? He spent his nights alone in the vast Fifth Avenue penthouse. She had let him keep it, a place now haunted by the ghost of a woman he had never truly seen. He would walk through the library and remember her curled in the armchair, and the memory would taunt him. The books she read weren't just for leisure. He recalled her once reading a dense volume on Byzantine mosaic techniques. Months later, Atelier Céleste released a collection featuring embroidery so complex it was hailed as a work of art. The charity auctions she chaired, which he had dismissed as her little hobby, were masterpieces of logistics and high-stakes negotiation, events where she had cultivated a fiercely loyal network of powerful women. His home had been her classroom, her laboratory, and he had been the oblivious janitor. Atelier Céleste was more than a success. It had become a cultural touchstone. It was the uniform of the empowered woman. Its origin story was its greatest marketing tool. Every dress sold was a testament to Genevieve's quiet, formidable strength. He couldn't escape it. Even Kat was a part of the wreckage. He had seen a small article in a trade publication months ago. Her Petrova brand, tainted by its association with his scandal, had quietly folded. She was collateral damage, a pawn sacrificed in the opening move of a game she never knew existed. He felt a flicker of something, a dull ache that wasn't quite guilt, but a grim recognition of the totality of his miscalculation. The final, definitive blow came on a crisp autumn afternoon. For months, Solomon had been focused on a single goal, a project to restore his tarnished prestige: the acquisition of the old Vanderbilt estate in Southampton. It was a legendary property, a symbol of dynastic power he had craved his entire life. Owning it would be a statement that he was still a king. He had put in an aggressive over-market bid, certain he would secure it. His lawyer, Frank, entered his office without knocking, his face grim. "She got it, Solomon." Solomon looked up from his desk, his brow furrowing. "What are you talking about? The deal doesn't close until tomorrow." "It closed this morning. An all-cash offer came in last night, $20 million over your final bid." "No contingencies," Frank said, slumping into a chair. "We traced the buyer. It's a newly formed holding company. It's owned by Aura Ventures." Solomon leaned back, the air leaving his lungs in a silent rush. He stared out the window at the city he once thought of as his kingdom. He had imagined her buying it out of spite, a final, vindictive twist of the knife. But the truth, he suspected, was far colder and more devastating. She probably hadn't even thought of him. To her, the Vanderbilt estate was not a personal trophy. It was an undervalued asset with historical significance, a perfect location for a flagship hotel or a corporate retreat for her ever-expanding empire. It was just business, and in that moment, he finally understood. This was never about revenge. Revenge would have implied that he was still important, that his actions held sway over her emotional world. But he wasn't. He was the prologue. He was the suffocating soil from which something extraordinary had forced its way to the light. Her success wasn't the opposite of his. It was completely independent of it. The new empire was rising, casting a long shadow from which he could not escape. And its queen, the woman he had slept beside for 12 years, the woman he had underestimated to the point of his own ruin, did not look back. And that's the story of how Solomon York's ultimate betrayal became Genevieve Ainsworth's ultimate triumph. It's a powerful reminder that the people we underestimate the most are often the ones with the most incredible strength hidden just beneath the surface. Genevieve didn't just get revenge. She built a new legacy on the ashes of a life that was meant to keep her small. What did you think of her master plan? Was it a cold-hearted takedown or a brilliant act of self-reclamation? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you were captivated by this story of secrets, ambition, and payback, please show your support by smashing that like button and sharing this video with someone who loves a good story. And for more tales of intricate drama and stunning twists, make sure you hit subscribe and ring that notification bell so you never miss an update. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you in the next story.